Welcome to the U.S. latest news channel. Watch the video to the end to find out the current and breaking news about the Russian war in Ukraine. According to a statement by Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu today, more than 400,000 Russian citizens have applied to Russian law enforcement agencies to join the Russian army after the partial mobilization announced by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu Russian conscripts in the continuation of the description for the citizens under partial mobilization adequate and comprehensive training course is being held under the partial mobilization of Russian citizens of Ukraine also said that the army conscripts to fight directly, whether received in the territory of Ukraine has been sent to fight in the army under the limit of partial mobilization in order to protect Russian citizens and borders announced that they were taken into the army. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu also said that Russian citizens recruited into the army as part of partial mobilization were sent to the borders with full equipment and highly equipped equipment. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu this morning denied allegations by the Ukrainian General Staff and the Ukrainian intelligence agency that the Russian army insisted on forcibly enlisting people in the occupied territories in recent days. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu also announced that Russian citizens who were recruited on the instructions of Russian President Vladimir Putin received training at about 80 training grounds and that senior commanders in the Russian army gave these trainings. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, Russian President Vladimir Putin declared by Russian citizens and military veterans with experience in Ordusan partial mobilization they previously were drafted under the Ukrainian intelligence agency of the General Staff of Ukraine and declared that although Russian President Vladimir Putin declared by Russian citizens who do not have military experience under normal and partial mobilization, the Russian army, they joined forced claimed. The General Staff of Ukraine today, in a statement, which is under the occupation, Kherson, Zaporizhia, and the Russian army in the Crimean region of the people of the region in the name of getting into the military forcibly blocked the exits from the city of male citizens could be punished with death if they join the army and the Russian army of the Russian army in the territory of Ukraine, highlighting that threatened under occupation by forcing the citizens living in the regions of the Russian army and the Russian army claimed that they added. The press spokesman of the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that this statement made by the Ukrainian General Staff does not reflect the truth and that the Russian army treats the people of the region with tolerance in the regions under the occupation of the Russian army. A U.S. Institute for War Studies confirmed that interviews were conducted with Ukrainian citizens who fled the regions under the occupation of Russia, confirming the statement made by the Ukrainian General Staff in an interview. A Ukrainian citizen who fled the Russian-occupied Kherson region said that the Russian army threatened them and made offers, including offers of money, to join the Russian army in order to fight against Ukraine. The Ukrainian citizen who fled the Kherson region also claimed that the Russian army was persecuting the Ukrainian people in the occupied territories and that the Russian army was taking most of the men living in the region to partial mobilization camps in Russia in order to train them to fight against Ukraine. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said today that there is no need for any military mobilization in Belarus, stressing that Belarus is not in any state of war. The war taking place around its borders is only about Russia and Ukraine, and the Belarusian people should not have any concerns. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko had self-proclaimed himself as the head of state of Belarus in the previous period, but the people supported Alexander Lukashenko afterwards and approved him to serve as the president of Belarus and continue in his post. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko continued his statement, saying that the parties to the wars taking place in the region, especially Russian President Vladimir Putin, want to involve Belarus in the war, but Belarus will not intervene militarily in the wars taking place in the region. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko also stressed that the Belarusian army has been modernized for the fifth time and has state-of-the-art weapons and equipment, adding that the result of any attack against Belarus will be severe. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko added that he also supports Russian President Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine and is politically on Russian President Vladimir Putin's side. By publishing the news about him in the European and U.S. media, he stressed that Belarus and Russia are brotherly countries and that these two brotherly countries should always stand side by side in war and peace. Although Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko said that Russian President Vladimir Putin supports the invasion of Ukraine, he said that no Belarusian troops have been sent to Ukrainian territory and there will be no Belarusian intervention in this war. Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus in the absence of any intervention in the war. However, the borders of Belarus and the Ukrainian army organized these exercises, drills for Belarus. Belarus added that the Ukrainian border would be seen as a threat that has been shipped 15,000 troops and tanks. But these soldiers in the war of any equipment that has not been referred for intervention and shipped only at the border in order to protect the Belarusian borders that were found. Indicated. The statements of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and the General Staff of Ukraine after the last meeting today announced that they know that Belarus is on the side of Russia and that Belarus is taking moves that may pose a threat on the borders of Ukraine. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine warned Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, recalling the major defeats of the Russian army and stressing that Belarus should be ready for the end that may occur as a result of any intervention by Belarus in this ongoing war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky targeted Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko in a social media post today, explaining that any country located on the borders of Ukraine that could pose a threat to Ukraine should be ready for the consequences of war and defeat. Polish President Andrzej Duda announced today that Poland will send forensic experts and Polish Army forensic experts to Ukraine to assist Ukrainian law enforcement agencies in the commission of war crimes in areas occupied by the Russian army and then retaken by the Ukrainian army. In the continuation of his statement, Polish President Andrzej Duda also announced that Poland is on the side of Ukraine and Poland will do more for Ukraine than it should. Polish President Andrzej Duda said that 30,000 Polish soldiers who are on standby to fight against the Russian army and help the Ukrainian army are ready to help the Ukrainian army if Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky requests. After these statements made by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Polish President Andrzej Duda, he thanked Polish President Andrzej Duda and the Polish people and said that he feels from the bottom of his heart that they are on the side of Ukraine. Lithuania's President Gitanas Nausėda, Polish President Andrzej Duda, after the description of a similar statement, said they were ready to support Ukraine, Russia, and Lithuania or Lithuanian war crimes committed in Ukraine, who served in the army in order to prove. The forensic experts also explained that they were going to in order to help law enforcement agencies in Ukraine, and military assistance to Ukraine had been possible in the continuation of the description offered, but refused the offer of help Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. This, he added. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a social media post today that the Russian army has massacred more than 50,000 Ukrainian citizens, including civilians and children, during the work carried out in areas occupied by the Russian army and retaken by the Ukrainian army, and the Russian military has committed war crimes. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's words were lies, saying that the Russian military did not show any violence to the civilian population, but as a result of the Ukrainian army's attacks on the regions in order to retake the occupied territories, civilians allegedly lost their lives. After these statements made by the Russian Defense Ministry and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, reactions from the European Union member states and the United States began to come without delay. Russia committed war crimes in the occupied territories of United Nations press spokesperson account will be asked sooner or later, and Russian President Vladimir Putin, stressing that they must be called when they needed to go against the Russian people. But recently Russian President Vladimir Putin announced the annexation of the territory of Ukraine in the territory of the Russian people and later in the rally against the war not to be placed next to Russian President Vladimir Putin and US and European media, in the press release, and support him. It was expressed in organs. Meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that Russia has committed crimes against humanity and war crimes, adding that the annexed territories are absolutely not recognized and will not be recognized. The General Staff of Ukraine announced that Russia has sent Russian soldiers serving in Syria to the occupied territories of Ukraine in order to hold the territories occupied by Russia on Ukrainian territory, and Russia has also announced that it has sent its military forces stationed in Siberia to the territory of Ukraine. The Ukrainian intelligence agency claimed that Russian President Vladimir Putin will issue a new law due to the disorder and disobedience that has recently formed in the Russian army. The Russian defense minister recently stated that the soldiers in the Russian army disobeyed their commanders and did not obey orders. The Ukrainian General Staff also announced that many villages and towns around Donetsk, one of the regions under the occupation of the Russian army, have been taken from the hands of the occupying Russian army. Who do you think will be the winner of the Ukrainian-Russian war? You can support us by liking the video and subscribing to our channel.